I'm very happy today to be talking with Nadine Pfautz, owner of C.H.A.R.T Consulting. Good morning, Nadine.
Good morning.
I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about C.H.A.R.T Consulting. Can you tell us what it is and what you do?
Sure. I'm a human resource consultant. I am the owner and founder of the business and 6 years in business, and or beginning my 6th year. And I work with businesses, small businesses, mid-sized businesses, large businesses, to help them become more efficient and effective and compliant when it comes to their human resource side of the business. So it varies depending on the size of the organization, what I do for them and how I do that.
Now, do you, when you mention businesses, do you work for both for-profit and non-for-profit businesses?
I do. In my past life, I was a full-time director of human resources at a nonprofit college, religious organization. And since going into business, I have worked with a fairly large nonprofit, about 250 employees, who did have a human resource person, but that there was a period of transition. And I went in to assess what they were doing. Were there any areas of risk for them? I conducted sexual harassment awareness training for them, and I did a variety of things for them. And now, since that time, I have a client, it's a nonprofit, which when I started was about 50 employees, and then they went through a merger, now 105 or thereabouts. And I started out by doing a project for them. It happened to be their employee handbook. Then I went in and did a human resource assessment, checking to see what they had in place, what they didn't, were their employee files compliant, those kinds of things. And then I began a more part-time arrangement with them, and currently I'm on retainer, and I'm their acting training manager, so I'm coordinating all their training programs. But then, in addition to the retainer, are the hourly pieces, including helping them with recruiting and re-editing again and reviewing the employee handbook, those kinds of things.
Wow, that's very comprehensive.
Yeah, it is, and it depends. You know, it's interesting. One of the questions people ask is, well, what's the difference between nonprofits and profits? There really isn't a difference because they're all legally required to comply with laws and related to the human resource side of things. And what makes the difference is just the number of employees, really, and whether or not they get federal grant money.
But if they do get federal grant money, what?
There are other rules, regulations, laws
Okay.
that apply if you accept grant money.
Okay, and you've worked with that as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Those who do and those who don't.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Then with all of your experience with not-for-profits, if you had to name some of the key challenges you see them facing in these current challenging times, what would you say they are?
There's three. One is nonprofits typically can't pay what companies for profit can. And so to find the right people to fill the positions, what it really comes down to is mission. The person who eventually takes that job has to really be committed to the mission in order to take the salary that's being offered. So that's huge. It happens that even in this time, with the economy such that it is, the nonprofit that I'm working with is continuing to hire. And there are people available because people are willing to take jobs. But then it comes down to picking the right person. Someone who's going to be in it for the long term, who really wants to support the mission. So I think that's a big one. I think nonprofits sometimes tend to use more part-timers than full-timers. So that has its own inherent challenges. This one organization that I'm working with right now is a 24/7 operation. A lot of the part-timers work weekends and nights because they have full-time jobs. So to get them into training, like required training, orientation, those kinds of things, makes it a little more difficult. So I would say there's the full-time, part-time issue, the salaries that can be offered. And then the other piece is sometimes the budgets themselves are a constraint, but also if an organization has applied for a grant, often they don't know till October 1st they have a grant and that it's effective October 1st and they have to start spending the money. So that forethought really has to go into, oh, what are we going to do if we get this, and how much money are we going to get, and does that mean we have to add staff or train staff, that kind of thing.
Okay, and if
Yeah.
you had 3 sort of HR tips for businesses and in particular for nonprofits.
I'd say they don't necessarily apply just to nonprofits, but one is be careful about setting precedent. It's very easy for nonprofits to be almost paternalistic about their employees. They want to take care of them. These people are sacrificing income, for example, to work for us. We need to take care of them. So they often make exceptions to their own policies, and once you've done that, you run the risk of that becoming a precedent that somebody else is going to tap into. And a great one is medical leave. Sometimes they just let medical leave go on and on and on and on, whereas they're only required, if there's 50 or more employees, for Family Medical Leave Act is up to 12 weeks. So how can you let one person and not let the next? And so that's one of the things that I think really is an issue, particularly in nonprofits. And what you don't know is what's going to hurt you. And what I often find is companies just don't know. Nonprofits just don't know that these laws apply to them and that they have to be careful. Prime example of that is how you classify employees, exempt versus non-exempt, exempt from overtime versus eligible for overtime. And there are very clear regulations on that. And I go into a nonprofit and see that they've got everybody classified as exempt because they don't want to pay overtime. Well, that's in violation of the law. So it's almost like, yes, you have blinders on, but it still can hurt you. And so I think that's a big one. Those are probably the 2 biggest ones that I see. I do think that another challenge, and I mentioned this, was recruiting and getting the right people into the jobs, having very clear expectations, communicating those expectations, and making sure that you're doing the right background checks to determine, is this the right person for the job? So I would say those are the top 3.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.